Our theme this week is on noticing God in everything. We're in the 13th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus is telling a series of parables to the crowd, including his disciples. And he's using different imagery in these parables to symbolize what the kingdom of heaven is like. Today, in verse 33, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Now, several elements of this parable on the yeast may be surprising. First of all, in the Bible, yeast is almost always a symbol for corruption. It's used negatively. Here it's used positively. The surrogate for God in this parable is a woman who is baking, and so she hides yeast in 3 measures of flour. That's a bushel of flour, 128 cups of flour, or the equivalent of 16 5-pound bags of flour. And you add about 42 cups of water, and you have close to 100 pounds of dough on your hands. Now, have you ever kneaded dough and made bread? Can you imagine having 100 pounds of dough to push against and the resistance? And the focus of this parable is on the miraculous growing kingdom of heaven. And it's amazing how this whole huge lump is leavened by a little yeast. And that lump of dough is kind of standing in for the world. And Jesus suggests enough dough to make it handle like the world it represents, which is not easily. And one of the things about yeast, which is different from a seed, is that in both the parable of the sower and the parable of the weeds and the wheat, in the parable of the mustard seed, the thing about seeds are, if you plant seeds, if you go back to the ground and look for them, you might actually find a seed or two. But when yeast is in the dough, it's indistinguishable from it. It's irretrievable out of it. You can't find it. It's just a part of it. And so here in this image of the kingdom of heaven being like yeast, it's kind of like, think of how one person trying to follow Jesus, trying to be faithful to Christ and becoming more like Jesus, how one person can have an outsized impact in their family, in their relationships, in their community. Just like a church can seem very small, just as the movement of Jesus is small at this point in Matthew's gospel, and yet over time, how the impact and the influence can grow. So the next time you're eating a piece of bread, you might want to pause and think about Matthew 13, verse 33. Think about the people who harvested the wheat or the barley or the grain to make that bread. Think about how did this get kneaded and how it made it to your table. And when you do that, think also about the impact you can have, which may seem really small, but can extend far and wide, just like the kingdom of heaven.